entire year. Our Piscataway High School academies, which is really beginning to grab a lot of students. And when we get to the SAT and we start seeing the colleges that students want to go to, and we start seeing the majors that they want to major in, we're beginning to see that our academies are beginning to line up with the things that the students want to do when they leave our schools. And our transition and mentoring programs, making sure that when students leave one grade level or one building and go to another, that there is a transition there for them so we are able to move them from one place to another place. Piscataway High School, here's the data for the high school. Essentially, you can see here, this is something that zeros here is because the 11th grade was not predicated, was not mandatory, and so only had 4 students who actually took it. And you can see those 4 passed, and why you see the 100% there. I mean, well, you don't see the 100% failed that particular part, but none of them actually passed. There was 4 students there, and these are the courses that we did. And at the high school, the ones who took the NJ SLAW, and we had pretty good success on that. We were above the state average with them as well. Here's a good report that we want to show you. We use Linkit, which is our data warehousing vehicle. And what Linkit does is that this is a good example, and I know it's kind of small, but this is what you call a longitudinal, or you're watching students, the same students as they go from one grade to the next grade. And so we see here, the best way to look at it is that when you see here a lot of green, that's when you know that the students are actually doing better as they go from one grade, and these are the same students. So right here, we can see the same, this was a group of students who took it in grade, I can't see, that's in grade 3. Grade 3. And then those students went to grade 4, and we can see from grade 3 to grade 4 that those students went from, they went up by 7%. And so we can see as we go down here, we can see all of the green, which lets us know that our programs and our instruction and our curriculum is working because it gets more rigorous, but the students are getting more successful. Right here, you look at it, it's tracking students from 214, 15, all the way down, and we can see how good the students have done there.
Dr. B, real quick.
Yes, sir.
So we show you this slide because we want you to see, this is a tool that we were able to purchase a year ago. Okay, replacing another tool with this is much easier to use and does things like this much more quickly. So these are the kinds of tools that we're tracking. So for you to look at how 1 year does in the NJSLA or PARC or whatever you want to call it, and how they do year over year is one thing. But we want to look and see how the students are doing, if the same group of students, how they're doing year over year. So this is one of those reports as we do that. So we look at that report that said, yeah, we either grew 5% in from 1 year to the next. Those aren't the same students, right? So this gives us a really good, but that's how the state measures it, right? This gives us the same kids how they do the next year and how our instruction helps them the following year, things like that. So that's why we wanted to show you this. We don't expect you to read everything and understand everything on the page. But this is one of the tools that we look at to measure kids, the same kid, over a 3, 4, 5 year period.
And right here, this here tracks students, the same students for 1, 2, 3, 4, for 5 years. We track those students there. Some things that we look at is that, for example, we adjust curriculum because we have adjusted the scope and sequence of curriculum by using and watching this. Because sometimes we found out that we were teaching skills, for example, in grade 5, that in grade 5 the students need to be tested on in grade 6, and so in grade 6 we were not testing, so we managed to adjust the scope and sequence to match the skills and to align with the standards. Here's another good example here of same grade, different students. So when you see same grade, different students, it's good to measure program, curriculum, and teacher efficacy right there. So we see here disproportionality programs we're looking at. So we see that in the elementary schools in ELA, we see with African Americans how that's constantly rising. We see that essentially the same thing here. We see that we have basically increases all across the board. I hasten on to say that even here, when we start looking at this, you have to take into consideration the actual number of students. So right here, for example, there's multiple, let me go back there. There's multiple, you're only talking 20 students here. So that's 20 kids.
Yeah, so a swing of 2 students is huge for as far as percentage points.
Right here, you're talking 62 students. So there's 62 students here, 20 students here, and you're talking something like 140 some students there and so forth. So it's a different calibration when you look at that. Same thing here in the middle school. Same thing there. This is called a DLM, the Dynamic Learning Map. This is what's given to our ESL students. And these students, the students who are in the ESL program, so they get this. The goal is to get these students right here, at or advanced. So these are the various steps that we have to get them to, but the goal is to get those students there as quickly as possible. These are the number of students who are at each grade level that took the DLM. So these are the students with the, this is the DLM is the students who tested out of regular education and they took the special education. With the DLM, we tested approximately in our district, less than 1% of our district was DLM and less than 7% of our SPED population. So that was the DLM, and it's the alternative assessment for students who are cognitively disabled and cannot take the regular standardized test, so they take the DLM. Access test is where our bilingual students test. You test a 4.5 of ESL students to test out of the program. Research says that the students need about 5 to 7 years to attain what is called academic language in the program. We normally try to exit our students between 2 to 4 years. And so if we look here, we'll see that in this particular instance, in 2018, 53 out of 449 students hit the 4.5 alone. We use multiple criteria to exit students, but these students, they exited just off of that criteria there. Right here we saw 55, but here's another indicator. Right here we see there were 268 students who were in the bilingual program for 2 years, consecutive years. Out of that, 80 of those students exited, and 153 out of the 268 of those students went up by at least a 0.5. SAT, what we did here with the SAT is that we basically, the SAT has an SAT handbook, annual report that it gives, and so it's quite exhaustive. So what we wanted to do is just basically show you the distribution of the percentage of scores and the amount of students that actually took the test. So we had 424 students who took the test. That's the score distribution. I can tell you that we scored within the 75th percentile nationally, and so this is where the scores fell on the SAT. And there's one other thing that I want to just share regarding the SAT, and I found to be very interesting, and that is where the students want their transcripts sent. And so when the students took the SAT test, we found out that the top place that the students wanted to send their transcript was Rutgers. With 71% of the students tested wanted their transcripts to go to Rutgers. Second was King University, where 95 or 27.1 wanted their transcripts to go there. Third was New Jersey Institute of Technology. Fourth was Montclair State. Fifth, Middlesex County College. Sixth, the College of New Jersey. 7, William-Patterson. 8, Seton Hall. 9, Rowan. And the 10th school was Rider. So those are the top schools that the students, in percentage-wise, where they wanted to send their scores. Also, I think it's interesting for us to know what they want their degree to be in. And the degree that most of them chose, there was a tie between business management, marketing, and related support services, and health professions and related clinical services, which you can see tied in to our academies. Second was biological and biomedical sciences, tied into our academies. Third was engineering, and fourth was computer information sciences, the one that majors to be in those things. And another thing, and lastly, while I'm on the SAT, degree level goal, only 1% of our students wanted a certificate. 6 students, or 2%, wanted an associate. 26%, or 103 students, wanted a bachelor's. 148 wanted a master's, and 104 students wanted a doctorate degree out of those amount of students that took the test. Other areas of achievement, like I said, we look for a holistic approach. So we know that we have other things that show that our students are achieving and they're performing and they're doing well. And so we will continue in our great district to understand that student achievement is not only test scores, but it's also music, art, and other things in their life.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? Ralph?
One of the selling points for when Park came into existence was that a parent and the school would receive information on their child at a much earlier rate, so they then can implement it into the next season. Does that actually happen?
You mean, now when you say like the information from the assessment itself? Or, yes, because these things go to the next grade. And so as soon as they get those things to the next grade, the teachers are on them immediately. The principals get them as soon as they come. And so the principals are beginning to share those things and pushing them down to the right people that needs to have those things. I would say right now that if not all, the majority of the teachers already know where those students are who are sitting in their seats. And we've already had conversations. They've already looked at the ISR, individual student reports. It helps them form their groups. It helps them frame their, like especially in their reading groups. It helps the teachers even establish their SGOs, because when the teachers look at the SGOs, which I do October 31st, they have to have multiple measures to use for their SGOs. So they also use that information to set their SGOs.
Now, is there also correlation, because I love the idea if you have the win, what I need, looking at that data to say, okay, this is mathematics, you're strong in multiplication, but you are, beneath proficient in subtraction. This is what we're going to gear towards. Is that kind of information being utilized, or that's how we're setting up?
Is one. So we're careful not to use standardized test data as the instrument, but we're looking at it as one instrument. And we also know, like we have something called evidence statements, which will take the questions on the NJSLA and align them to the standards that they are related to. There are some tests that have some questions that have multiple standards. The teacher knows where they are. So they'll basically take and implement those tests, and then they'll run series in the classroom using those sample tests. And the kids
Dr. B, if I could add something, yes, so we get multiple days of release reports in August and in July and August for our purposes to use just like that. So in the middle of August, we'll get individual student reports, but we won't get the boxes of paper that they need us to send home. So we'll have them, the schools will have them, and they, like Dr. Baskerville said, we don't use that as the only factor, but we use that as one factor, and they really get broken down into lower points where you could really digress and see where deficiencies or strengths are.
Phil?
One question and one, I guess, observation. The question is, there's been a lot of discussion, in various places about the elimination of the Park test or its replacement with something else. Will one of the perhaps unintended consequences of that be that districts that have been using the data appropriately for sort of multi-year longitudinal data analysis will kind of be back at square one on that?
That's a good question, but we are ahead of the curve with that. So we have learning targets that we do that are unilateral across the grade levels, and we can run reports, and we can basically get from our own internal district assessments the same data that we're getting from those standardized reports. So we still have data in-house that we can use for those things. And we have multiple reports. We can use comparative reports, which compare grades in schools across the district. We can use item analysis, which will break down the question and how many students got it right, how many students got it wrong. And so we have multiple reports that we can run on our in-district assessments that we give.
Do we find that the conclusions of sort of longitudinal studies of the in-district assessments are comparable with those that are given to us by Park?
We found that there's a better correlation in mathematics than it is in ELA, because mathematics is more discrete. In ELA, you have them that are grading things on rubrics, so ELA at some particular point can become a little bit subjective as opposed to the very discrete aspect of mathematics.
If I could add that, so what we do today doesn't show for the next 5 years, really, right? So the longitudinal study of that. We'll continue to do what we do, so things that we started years ago, we're seeing the fruits of that. We look for things that can compare us to in certain ways. So the AP tests, or AP scores, right? Once again, we were added to the AP honor roll, which measures a certain increase in number of kids who take it, but also a certain increase in kids who passed it. So that correlates, right? So for 3 years in a row, we've been on the AP honor roll as growing our population who take it and growing that number of passing scores. So that's an indicator that what we're doing and what we're trying to match up is really hitting the targets of what the global education is, especially something like College Board, which is a nationwide test for APs.
And then the observation was, I mean, there was a tremendous amount of data there.
Lot of
so-
stuff there, yeah.
But one sort of, I guess, high-level observation that jumped out at me, and correct me if this is wrong, because it was coming pretty quick, but it seemed as though in the elementaries, by and large, we used the state as kind of a control group. That we had, we started out with fairly significant advantages in both ELA and mathematics versus the state in the elementaries, and that those advantages sort of, leveled off, the growth of them, and then kind of disappeared over time and went kind of back down to the state average. So given that these tests, subjects like ELA and mathematics are usually skills you build upon from grade to grade, it would seem that once you hit kind of an inflection point where you start losing ground to your control group, then each year you're actually likely to fall further behind after that, because next year's skills have to build upon the skills you learned the year before. And if you've started to fall behind the year before, chances are you're going to fall behind again the year after. So that's kind of the impression I got. And then subsequently, I would wonder if there was, if we could kind of target in on that inflection point, if it exists, and direct resources to, try to remediate
I
it.
think we both have answers to that. I'll let Dr. B go first.
One of the things, especially in mathematics, math, when it starts hitting grade 6, becomes more abstract. And so the kids learn discrete math up until grade 5, and when they hit grade 6, and you start looking at things, and then you really don't get into equations on a heavy level until you start getting into advanced math, algebra, and so forth. So one of the things that we start doing is we start pushing the algebra, the pull-out algebra classes, and we start focusing on those things earlier. And we're also pushing and shifting the curriculum down. So we were doing certain things. For example, we had started teaching ratios and proportions in grade 4. Now we've moved that down to grade 3. So we're moving skills down in the scope and sequence of the curriculum to try to hit those things, because we notice. Now, other districts, some of them, because it's something that is a similar situation across the state at those particular benchmarks and grade, but we find that the scope and sequence of the curriculum has a lot to do with that. Another thing is geometric properties in math, so where we introduce those things. We found that if we do it according to where certain of the standards and so forth have it listed, that we won't have an advantage if we try to use scope and sequence exactly like it's laid out. So we are learning to teach more to our population and the needs where they are, and stay aligned to the standards as best as we can. So that's one of the things that we're looking at doing.
If I could also, when we interview for the past 4 or 5 years since I've been here, particularly in math, we're looking for math teachers who can really push down those Algebra 1 concepts as low as 4th grade. So not teaching Algebra 1, but teaching verbiage, teaching vocabulary, teaching styles of completing things. So we are trying to target those things to hit those years where we see a dip in certain things. Also, when we get into the later grades, you're also taking into consideration kids who were not ours for a long period of time. So that fluctuates with the numbers of kids moving out and kids moving in, and by the enrollment office, there's a ton of them all the time. So those two things are factors that we also look at.
And just a good point what you just mentioned. So we even, because now we're using Go Math in kindergarten. So we decided to move away from Tools in the Mind. Go Math is pushed down into K. And we're beginning to introduce algebraic properties in kindergarten. So we will have 1 plus box equals 4. Student know how to put 3 in the box. Then we will remove the box and say 1 plus x equals 4. And then the student will say x equals 3. So what we're doing is we're teaching them to solve for the unknown and the variable even starting in kindergarten. So we're moving things down at that. So we're touching on those things and trying to make sure that those inflection points, we are actually addressing them.
Thank you.
But I'll go back to the AP correlation, right? That a nationwide test from College Board, we are making gains. So when these tests, the PARCC or SLA or whatever you want to call them, come out, every year. There's also questions on how valid they are, right? On how hard they are, whether they go into certain districts or not. We don't know all that stuff. So there's certain variables that, not to mention a one-day test for a kid in sixth grade. It's just a snapshot of what they could possibly do.
Right, I would just say that, I mean, our AP students do exceptionally well. The AP program is terrific, and like you said, more and more students have been taking those exams without reducing the number that show proficiency, without reducing the percentage that get those 3, 4, and 5s that are going to get you the college credit. So, I have I have little doubt that those students that are taking those APs are the same top students that we see getting 4s and 5s
It's that other.
on the, meets or exceeds expectations on the parks and the various other assessments. So, and we've talked about this as a board a number of times, where we feel that we do, an excellent job with our top students. We, we direct, a large amount of resources appropriately to help our students along that are struggling, but we never want to forget about our students that are in between those two groups, which, in most cases comprise the majority of our students, and will sort of be anchoring a lot of those scores.
So I want to thank you for doing such a great job with the presentation. I just have a couple of comments, and that is, for the audience, there's actually a quiz. There's actually 7 board members up here, plus 2 administrators. If you take away 4 and add 3 that aren't here, can someone please put the algebraic equation on the board for me? So, all seriousness aside, is that, as you can see, K through 12 education is complicated. And Dr. Baskerville has taken over as head of curriculums and programs, and so we have to take a look at our achievement data. We have to interpret it and see where we have gaps and address them. How the board does that, every 5 years, we do a 5-year strategic plan, which we put up there. As you notice, the first one starting in our new strategic plan is student achievement and engagement. Then what happens is that we set each year annual district goals. We just did that this week, as a matter of fact, and we'll be actually voting on them tonight. But the administration has already interpreted this data, looked at it, and a couple of our annual goals for enhancing our educational program address them. And I can speak about this because, as a child of 3 children who came to the whole Piscataway school system, pre-K through the high school, and now are graduated, and one's a 7th grade 8th grade algebra teacher, okay? We have to put them in terms that also people can understand. Because one of them, we had the word vertical integration. And what vertical integration is just about is that when you leave the 4th grade, the 5th grade teacher knows what was going on in the curriculum in the 4th grade. So we set a goal for that. And so we're doing a good job at looking at this complex data. But at the end, they leave, and they go off, whether it's a technical job or whether it's on to college. And my thing has always been with the SATs, because what we're always at the whim of is that we went through a period of time over the last 5-6 years where we had to adopt the core curriculum, these national core curriculums, so that a kid in Georgia and a child in New Jersey were getting the same level of education at the 3rd grade. But the piece that really got messed up, which is what I think, that's hard to follow, was the Partnership for the Assessment for Readiness for College and Careers. It was called PARC. And that assessment piece put a bad taste in a lot of people's mouth, and it was complicated. But so what's challenging is, what I'm trying to say is that you're measuring tomatoes, and then they tell you, here's a bunch of oranges, but it's called PARC, and then you go back to New Jersey standards. So doing a good job at seeing how, I really like this tracking of the same students. I think that's invaluable. I think that's really great. Because last, and I'll end on it, is the SAT. The SAT went from 2 parts, 800, 800, 1600, to 3 parts, to 800, 800, and 800 for whatever, back to 1600. And you mentioned all of the New Jersey schools that kids are looking at. What parents in our community have to realize is that that's important data if they go on to a college in New Jersey, because Rutgers gives you money. So a parent has an idea ahead of time that if they get above $13.50, they could be in the honors program. They'll get a certain amount of money. Rutgers will only cost you your room and board. It won't cost you your tuition. And so there's levels there. So I'll leave it at that. What I'm saying is that you did a great job at communicating a lot of complicated information. We've set our goals for the year, and I think we're on track for good student achievement.
All of this in conjunction with student wellness, soft skills,
Right.
taking care of kids. So, I mean, it's an amazing job. So, thanks, Doc.
Thank you.
40 minutes, it's good.
All right, our next item on the agenda is the Personnel and Labor Relations, which is item 8. And Vice President Hattie, will you please read the resolution?
Sure. Be it resolved that the following motions identified as items A through E be approved as presented.
Second.
Is there any discussion? Okay. Oh, non-personnel. Oops. I'm in a learning curve, too. So, Mr. Board Secretary, will you please read the roll?
Mr. Fields?
Yes.
Mrs. Hobson?
Yes.
Mr. Irwin?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Ms. Rashid?
Yes.
Mrs. Depan?
Yes.
Dr. Connors?
Yes.
Motion's carry.
Item 9, approval of minutes. Mr. Irwin?
Be it resolved that the following minutes be approved as submitted. The business meeting of September 12th, 2019, the executive session of September 12th, 2019.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries. Item 10, public comments from the floor. The Board of Education recognizes the value of public comment on educational issues and school matters of community interest. In support of this position, the law establishes a period of public comment at every board meeting. Individuals wishing to speak must state their name and address. Comments are limited to 3 minutes duration, but an individual may speak a second time after all others who wish to speak on the topic have been heard. The board may require that individuals register to speak prior to the beginning of the meeting. Participants may submit written material in support of their position. All statements and/or questions shall be directed to the presiding officer, and no participant may address or question board members individually. All speakers are requested to express themselves in a civil manner with due respect for the dignity and privacy and rights of others whose legalese rights may be affected. Please note, while it's not the board's intention to stifle comment on matters of legitimate concern to the school community, the public should be aware that if their statements violate the rights of others under the law governing defamation or invasion of privacy, they may face personal liability to the injured party. If speakers are uncertain of the legal ramifications of their comments, the board urges them to seek guidance beforehand from their own legal advisor. Are there any public comments from the floor?
Good evening.
Steve?
Dr. Anelli, congratulations on your new
Thank you
position.
very much.
Dr. Connors, and to the new board, congratulations. My name is Chris Iotis. I live at 211 Elizabeth Avenue. And for those on the board that did not know him, my father, Edward Iotis, had served on the board for 20 years. He resided in the Arbor section of town his entire life. And unfortunately, he will not be able to make his 50th class reunion coming up. My father recently passed away on September 11th, and prior to his passing, we had several heart-to-heart talks about his wishes of when he passed, and about, there's always one thing that he always brought up. He has one big wish, was that he wanted a tree planted in the Arbor School in his name. My father resided in the Arbor section his entire life. He was the board liaison to Arbor School for 20 years. With that being said, I'm here this evening seeking some help to make his ultimate wish come to fruition. I'm here to propose to have a tree planted at Arbor School. Along with the tree would be a bench and a plaque of some sort, however the board, feels fit.
Well, Chris, first of all, when we heard the news, actually, it was Board of Education meeting that day. And we, did a little moment of silence last at the meeting, and, condolences to you and your family, and 20 years on the board, and I'm only halfway there, and believe me, it's a lot of work, and, really, what your father did for the town was great. What we will do, I've discussed with the superintendent, is that we will take your request under consideration, and then we will get back to you as to what, proposal of what to do. And absolutely, and you, thank you for coming out,
Absolutely.
Chris.
Appreciate it, thank you.
For your loss.
Thanks.
Are there any other people that wish to address the board? Do I have a motion to close?
Motion.
Second.
Those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Passes. Item 11 is fiscal plannings and operations. I guess I'll read it because the other committee member is not here. Well, Bill, you're on the committee, so Bill, will you?
Sure, be happy to. Be it resolved that the following motions identified as items A through F be approved as presented.
Second?
Just one comment on F, Dr. Green.
Sure.
I just want to thank David Olivera. I'm sure it'll come up under the fiscal committee report, but, for all the work he did in getting together a cybersecurity evaluation, which is one of our annual goals for this year, to really sort of tighten up our standards and, finding Developer to consult with us on that.
That's item F there. Item F is the board being proactive in cybersecurity. Any other discussion? All right, Mr. Board Secretary, read the roll.
Mr. Fields?
Yes.
Mrs. Hobson?
Yes.
Mr. Irwin?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Sheed? Mrs. Depan?
Yes.
Dr. Connors?
Yes.
The motion's carried.
Next is item 12, which is policy, but I don't believe we had any policy.
Not this week.
Okay, so we'll skip that and go to item 13, which is curriculum. And with that, Chantel's not here, so I'll ask Jeff, will you please read that?
Be it resolved that the following motion identified as item A through E be approved as presented.
Second.
Any discussion? Oh, and you will make the note that on item D, that the approval of course name changes, that the word honors will be put at the beginning of the class rather than at the end.
That's over the transcript, yes.
Because on the transcript, sometimes they get truncated so that college admissions don't know that they're an honors class and like that. Thank you for that comment, Earl Irwin, thank you. Any other discussion? Mr. Board Secretary, will you please read the roll.
Mr. Irwin?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Sheed? Mr. Fields?
Yes.
Mrs. Hobson?
Yes.
Mrs. Depan?